you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I will just say, I think it was the first ever Staff Plus event this last spring. It was dope. It was so great. I think it's the best conference I've ever been to. So it was, nobody's paid me to say that. I just thought it was really fun. It was different. I mean, in tech, you're either like the early adopter or the late adopter, or whatever, and I tend to skew early adopter, so for what it's worth. As you said, my name is Charity. I am a co-founder of Honeycomb.io. My background is that of an infrastructure engineer. Whoa, that went fast. I wanted to stay there. So Database Reliability Engineering is the book that I wrote a few years ago. Observability Engineering is out now. And for those of you who have hard copies, I brought stickers so you can put pigtails on the wolf and everything. So if you want one, find me afterwards and I will give you one. This is a tradition that grew out of, see, as an O'Reilly author, I don't know if you know this, but you can't have fictional creatures as your animal. We wanted it to be a unicorn, and they said we couldn't, so we have a palomino horse, so we made a sticker with a unicorn on a unicorn horn. And that's how anyway, it's the whole thing. Moving on. How many of you have ever said something like this? Or this? There are actually some pretty good points in here. And then as you become, a manager, it kind of turns into more like this. Suffice it to say, there are a lot of toxic patterns around on-call. Like, I do not dispute that many people here have had traumatizing experiences. I myself started carrying a pager when I was 17, and there are still some ringtones that if I hear them, I'm like, ugh. It goes deep, right? My goal is not to convince you that it's not this way. My goal is to convince you that it doesn't have to be this way. We can actually do a lot better. I have experienced on-call rotations that were a badge of honor. It meant that you were senior enough, you were, sophisticated enough to run this incredibly, sophisticated system that people depend on and rely on. On-call rotations that rarely impact your sleep or your life. They're important, but they're not dysfunctional. They could even be something that you legitimately look forward to. It's a change of pace. It's an opportunity to scratch your brain in a slightly different way. And I actually think that the mark of a truly healthy on-call rotation is that people can choose into it. That you can run it completely volunteer only, and people will choose to do it. So if we unpack this a little bit, what does on-call work to me? Well, it's a social contract. It's a really critical part of software ownership, which is something that's been a big topic over the past 5 years. It's a pretty good health. It is necessary, but not, It's necessary, but not, sufficient. Thank you. Necessary, but not sufficient, metric for how well your team is doing. And it's a set of, expertise in its own right. The social contract, in my mind, looks like this. Engineers, it's your job to own your code. That which you have, much like parenting, you put it out into the world, you're responsible for it, right? And managers, it's your job to make sure that owning it doesn't suck, right? You can't really, I don't think that you could ethically ask someone to get woken up in the middle of the night and carry this pager, be responsible for a system without providing them the kind of support, technical, emotional, socio-technical support that makes it sustainable. Even though there are always going to be sucky times, right? I think it's a lot less, much like every other burnout topic, it's not about making sure things never are bad. It's about making sure that you take it seriously and recover when it does get bad. Who should be on call for their code? Literally anyone who's putting code into production. This is not payback. As an operations engineer, I acknowledge that operations always had a thick streak of masochism, and it is not just about, all right, we've done this for 20 years now, it's your turn. It's really about the fact that our systems are getting to the point of complexity where you can't really do it any other way. You can't expect for one set of people to write the code and another set of people to run the code. It just doesn't work that way. You could argue that it never really worked pretty well, But it worked-ish for long enough that that's why we had ops teams, right? The process of writing code, and owning code, where, let's be real, like the amount of time and energy that you sink into building the code, writing the code in the first place, you can round it down to 0 compared to the amount of time and energy it takes to maintain that code over the long run, right? Maintenance costs are everything. But on call is how we close this feedback loop, right? The feedback loop of, you write it, you own it, you know what's going wrong with it. If all of that signal about what's wrong with your software is going to someone else, your software is never going to grow up. And if owning your code sucks, this is a list of things where I think that managers should start, right? Audit the alert strategy, start looking at the DORA metrics, track every single alert outside of business hours, wrestle enough cycles away to actually fix things, etc. And, there's a lot of debate over like how technical managers should be. I tend to think they should be very technical. I don't think it's good advice. It's well-intentioned advice, but it's bad advice to tell managers to stop writing code and stop doing technical things. I understand why they have that advice, because that's the side that most new managers fail on. But that's actually bad advice. You do want to stay technical. You do want to submit yourself to some of the pain that your team is feeling. And there's no better way to do this. Actually, that's wrong. I would not add yourself to the rotation. I would be the backup of first resort, right? Add yourself to the rotation long enough to understand how to do it, and then make sure that whenever anybody needs to like go to the movies, whenever they had a bad night on call, you'll take the next night, right? Make it so that every week you're picking up a shift or two, a day or a few hours or whatever. It will make your team love you. It will make them respect you way more than if you don't. Common objections. My time is too valuable. This is the one I hate the most. If your time is too valuable to own your own code, whose time do you think is less value? Ops, obviously. There's a certain like engineering classism in there that it just really rubs me the wrong way. The middle one, I have a new baby. That's legit. Nobody should ever be consistently woken up by more than one source of chaos. So you get a pass for a couple years. If you have a follow the sun rotation, good for you. Most of us don't. And a lot of reasons for this. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to keep going pretty quickly. I'll post the slides afterwards, though. So let's make on-call fun again. This is how we do it, right? We make sure that we're adopting best practices. We get our systems to a legitimately healthier state, and in doing so, we become a higher performing team. In order to adopt best practices, like I said, there's a lot of expertise that goes into this. So do yourself a favor and don't try to find them all yourself nose first, right? You don't need to use trial and error to come up with this list. You can look on the internet and copy it. One of the most common things that I will point out here, though, is that, when systems are young, we tend to start alerting on symptoms. We alert on a bunch, this goes wrong, that goes wrong. That does not scale. If you are at all successful in life, at work, sorry, slightly different things. If you're all successful at your job, there will come a point where that's a really bad strategy. And you need to stop paging on symptoms and start alerting on, SLOs. On the impact that it has on your users. Align your on-call pain with your user pain so that usually people can delete like 90% of their paging alerts when they move to SLOs. The trade-off here is that you don't get to sit back and just passively wait for your system to tell you when something is wrong because your threshold for what is wrong gets higher. Right? Now this doesn't mean that what it means for on-call is that instead of like constantly getting pinged all day and night, it means that maybe once in the morning, once in the evening, you go and you look. Is there anything in, the secondary lane of things, disks that need to be failed over, things that are filling up, maybe 10% of, containers are down, things that just need to be repaired and noted. Do that sweep twice a day. And it also means that as engineers who are writing code, you need to get used to going and actively looking at your code and interacting with it in production, right? Instrumenting your code, and then shipping it and then going and looking and saying, is it doing what I expect it to do? Does anything else look weird, right? If you do those things, then you don't get to get paged as much. But if you don't do those things, then you're going to be like, I deleted all my pages and now I don't know what's going on. Well, you got to do both of those sides. Out of hours alerts, set a very high bar for these. This is what burns people out. Have a second lane of stuff to deal with, but not urgently. This is not the stuff that that is impacting your users at 2 a.m., right? But it does need to get dealt with within the next 12 hours or so. Put as much as possible into this lane. And then you need to start embracing real observability. I'm going to not go into all my rants about observability because I don't have time, number one. Number two, you've probably heard them. Number three, they're on the internet. But it's really important. As part of the whole maturing into be a very, very large distributed system, you have to stop looking only aggregates and only metrics. You have to have event level instrumentation where you can slice and dice in high cardinality, high dimensionality. I know you can look at this list. The other thing I want to point out is decoupling your deploys from your releases. Super critical. As engineers, you need to be shipping constantly, right? Many small diffs, one small diff at a time, ideally, throughout the day. But this doesn't work with releases, right? Releases need to be controlled and timed. That's why you need to decouple them with feature flags. Also, if you're yeah, I got all this done, great. I will raise the bar a little bit and say the best thing you can probably do for your team is to embrace automatic deployments. Not just CI/CD as in continuous integration, continuous delivery. It means sure, we can deploy at any time if we want to. That's not good enough, right? As soon as anyone merges their changes to main, you should kick off a process that generates an artifact and deploys it, at least to a small percentage of your service. It will change your life for the better. It is way easier to keep yourself from falling into a pit of doom than it is to dig your way out once you're there. Reliability work, technical debt. At least 20% of time needs to be spent on system upkeep, just steady state, which I'll get to that in a second. And you need to be able to test and protect. If you see my shirt, it says test and prod or live a lie. Run your chaos experiments. Something that we did at Honeycomb we've got all these Kafka volumes, hundreds, thousands of Kafka volumes, and Kafka was constantly we've got a lot of volumes, so something's always failing, and so somebody will be getting paged in the middle of the night to wake up and figure out. There are all these things that will cause Kafka not to boot up correctly. You can't be doing more than one sync at a time. You can't, all this stuff. So we're well, this is frustrating. Okay, from now on, every Monday we just kill the oldest Kafka node and let it bootstrap itself. And so, at 2 p.m. on Mondays for a month or two, that was, gotta go fix it. But it hasn't bothered us since then, right? If it hurts, do it more. And then you want to improve your performance as a team. And, this naturally leads to the question, well, how well does your team perform? And the first thing I want to point out is that this is not the same thing as saying, how good are you at engineering? There's no positive correlation here. High-performing teams are the ones that get to spend most of their time solving interesting problems that move the business materially forward. Lower-performing teams spend their time doing literally everything else. A good place to start here is with the DORA metrics, right? How often do you deploy? How long does it take? How often does it fail? How long does it take to recover? I think every team should be measuring these for sure. I think you should also be measuring, once again, how often do you get alerted outside of work? There is something very different about, being on call, knowing it's your job to sort of be troubleshooting and problem solving during the day versus getting pulled out of, the theater at 9 p.m. One wears on your life and your relationships a lot harder than the other. When it comes to the DORA metrics, there is an enormous gap between I don't really like the term elite, but fine, the elite teams and the rest. The high-performing teams have 973 times more frequent code deployments. The gulf here is, and the thing is that these are not hard things. These are not hard things to do. This is just engineering, just making your software deploy faster. I'm sorry, that's a little bit dismissive. It also takes a lot of political will, but it's not hard, is what I'm saying. And teams that don't spend time on this stuff, or teams that don't, like I said, it's so much easier to keep yourself out of the pit of doom than it is to dig your way out. The pit of doom that most people are sitting in it has to do a lot with deploys. And if your deploys are broken, your alerts are going to be miserable too. Track these things, they matter. Like, the point here is that great teams make great engineers. It's not the other way around. Oh, I'm going fast enough. I have a little bit of time to back up. Good. I apologize. I was so scared because the last time I gave this talk, I thought it was going to be 40 minutes. I timed it at 40 minutes, and it took almost 60. So I'm just like, all right, forgive me. I'm just going to like go back to this a little bit. I left my brain in San Francisco, apparently. But this is really the crux of it, right? This is the important part. All of this stuff rolls up into letting you improve your performance as a team, right? Having healthier alerts can't really be done if your systems are still sick, right? And a lot of the sickness is it's that pipeline between, like, when you write the code, you have it all in your head. You know what you're trying to do. You know what you did. You know why you built it that way. You know what you tried that didn't work. You know what the variables are named. You know what the functions are named. You know what you expect to happen, right? And if you if you make that loop tight, if you make it so that, within 15 minutes or less, you're going and looking at it as it runs in production, as real users using it, and you're asking yourself, does this look weird? Is it doing what I expected it to? You will find upwards of 80% of all bugs right then and there, because they'll be so obvious to you. The cost of finding and fixing bugs goes up exponentially from the moment that you write them, right? Like, you're typing, you find a bug, you backspace, good job, you spotted it, it's never going to get any faster or easier than that, right? But like, the second fastest place to catch it is once you've gotten it out into production, because that's where code becomes real. That's where code becomes meaningful. Code on the shelf is dead code. Like, it doesn't matter. If you haven't merged it yet, it may as well not even exist. It matters once it gets out into production. It matters once users are actually using it to do real things. Users are so much more creative than you and I are. They're going to come up with so many more tests than we would ever think to. And that's why I think one of the biggest things that you can do in order to make your team high-performing, and therefore your deploys high-performing, therefore your alerts high-performing, is to focus on shrinking that interval. And I know that, like, Jez Humble and all those guys, they've been yelling at us about this for like 15 years. But it's become more realistic than ever now. 15 years ago, the CI/CD mission was kicked off to fight the battle when we were just starting to go, well, maybe software doesn't have to be shrink-wrapped, right? We've come so far since then. Even, 5, 10 years ago, when I was setting up, Parse or Honeycomb, the tools for like continuous deployment didn't really exist outside of Facebook and Google. Now they exist for everyone, right? Now you can get feature flags off the shelf. You can get observability off the shelf. You can get, containers and Kubernetes and all the components that you need in order to be deploying quickly. Like, if you ask me to choose between the best set of unit and integration tests in the world and the ability to test in production, first of all, I'm glad we don't have to choose. I don't want to choose. You should have your tests. This is not an argument against tests. But I would 100% choose being able to test in production. Because it's the only kind of test that is actually real, that reacts to. It's like the Michael Jackson test. Michael Jackson can only die once. And he took down Google when he did, right? Well, you can't predict that. You can't test for that. You can only react to it when it happens in production. So... So observability-driven development is the mindset that we need to be moving people towards, and the mindset of, this code, I wrote it, so I own it, right? You don't own it yourself. People don't own code. Teams own code. You and your team collectively, you have agreed to own the set of code that you all work on, right? That's why you do code reviews for each other. That's why you try to make sure that more than one person knows every code base, because, you can't just be parachuted into somebody's code and go, ooh, I know how it works. You can't do that. But you can own your code, right? You can instrument it. You can make a practice of using the tools. Like, it makes me cringe whenever I hear software engineers talking about them as ops tools, because that's very othering, right? It's for the people who are running my code. They're development tools, like the tools that allow you to go in and inspect, every single event, and how the spike of errors, how did those events differ from all the other events that are not erroring? Those are just as important of development tools as your debugger, as GDB, or whatever kids are using these days. I guess we've all moved to that Microsoft editor. Thanks. I still use Emacs. If you can deploy in 15 minutes or less, it's almost like what you're doing is you're giving your engineers a production REPL, right? A shell where you're writing code and you're watching it. It's a little bit of a laggy REPL, but it's almost like a REPL, right? And it has the benefit of syncing up with reality. So if you can auto-deploy in 15 minutes or less, I guarantee you, you will not have any kind of a problem with retaining your engineers. You'll be able to use it for recruiting purposes. Because once engineers have worked in an environment like this, they will not go back. Deploy one merge by one engineer at a time. If you're an engineer on this team and you know that your code is going to be live within 15 minutes, you're probably going to go look at it. Versus if you're an engineer, you've merged some code, and you're pretty sure that at some point in the next hour to week, your code will probably go out with 0 or 50 other people's code, you're never going to go look at it. You're never going to close that loop, right? It's going to be black magic until something breaks, and then any of you 1 to 50 people are going to be like, okay, now all of our afternoon is busted because we all have to go figure out if it was our fault or someone else's fault. Can't say enough about that. Also consider whether or not you have enough operational expertise on hand. There's a trend these days, which, spinning down ops teams, and I'm for it, because that split between dev and ops should never have happened. I understand it seemed like a good idea at the time. It was a terrible idea. You can't separate development from maintenance and from running it. And in the future, we all write code. We all own the code that we write. What I worry about getting tossed out with the bathwater is operational expertise, because it is more important than it's ever been. A team of software engineers, and let me just say it, some of my best friends are software engineers. I've got nothing against you. But have expertise in running systems, most of you, right? Blah, blah, blah. That is not the talk that we're giving, though, so let's move along. The animations take a while. Great teams make great engineers. This is why people want to recruit engineers from Google or Facebook, and it's such backward thinking, because it's not that they went to Google because they were so amazing. No, they went to Google because they could write some basic algorithms. They probably just graduated, right? But being at Google, working on those world-class systems with those world-class engineers is what makes them great engineers. Everything that I know about engineering, almost everything I know about engineering, I learned because I got to work next to somebody who was I was explicitly warned about my... I got to work next to someone who was incredibly world-class at what they did. And I get to learn from them. This is an apprenticeship industry, right? We're all apprenticeships from each other's. The amount of time that we spent, I don't remember many people said it on Twitter, but like a real 10x engineer is an engineer who makes 10 people twice as good, right? Those engineers exist. Your personal ability to ship code swiftly and safely has a lot less to do with your own personal knowledge of algorithms. It has a lot more to do with all of the structure that's been built around you. If the best Google engineer in the world comes, if it takes if it takes 5 engineers for code to get out at your company, best engineer in the world comes and joins you, it's still going to take them 5 hours to get their code out. Right? This is a socio-technical system. And we're all both enabled and constrained by the same socio-technical system. And when we talk about investing into our deploys and investing into our alerts and investing into, all this stuff, we're talking about investing in the socio-technical system that either hampers or amplifies all of our labor. Which is why I think that the definition of a technical leader is someone who focuses intensely on those feedback loops that are at the heart of every socio-technical system, making sure that the dots are connected, making sure that, the person who's writing the code is also the one who's debugging the code. So, we chronically overestimate our own personal influence, and we underestimated the influence of the systems that we tend to live and work in, right? They actually have this term for it in sociology. They call it the FAE, the fundamental attribution error. I'm convinced they made that because of software. So now that we've done all this, right, now that we have moved from alerts to SLOs, deleted half to 90% of our paging alerts, change the unknown unknowns by speeding up deploys, by making it so that you're actually practicing, software ownership, and so that you're able to instrument your code, understand what's happening in production, test in production if necessary, even maybe auto-deploying your changes to production within minutes. Out-of-hours alerts should be vanishingly rare. But maybe you're like, okay, this sounds less crappy, but you told me I was going to be happy to be on call. Where's the icing? Well, I'll tell you. If you're on call, you are not supposed to work on the product or the roadmap at all that week. Not at all. Make sure product knows this, engineering owns this. Scold people for working on product if they're in their on-call week, because it's their week off. Your job while you're on call is to work on the system, to work on the socio-technical system. Whatever has been bugging you, those rough edges, or that thing, you're getting a splinter every time you try and deploy, or your tests are flaky, or just something's always annoying you, right? Whatever's been bothering you, work on that. Use your judgment, exercise your judgment, have fun, right? There's no better way to this is why hack weeks are so fun, right? You have agency, you get to look around, so much of our work gets sort of digested and planned and handed to us. Hopefully, in a high-performing place, at least hopefully you get to be part of that planning, right? Like we follow the triad model where you got engineer and design and product and they do all the research and everything together. Hopefully you have a say in it that way. But so much of it, by the time it reaches us, it's like, okay, build this thing, build this thing, build this thing. On call is your week to stretch your legs and look out and go, what is the place that I can spend my week that will have the highest impact for myself and everyone else in my team or the company? Some amazing stuff comes out of that. Engineers are creative. Engineers hate broken things. Engineers always have ideas, right? This is your week. If you're on call, if you've got a rotation, I think the ideal rotation is 7 people. So you're on call 1 week out of 2 months, every 2 months. That's 20, if you have 5 people in the rotation, that's 20% time. I think 20% time is ideal, right, for just ongoing maintenance costs. But you've at least got, a solid 12% time just dedicated to the system. It will make the system better. It will prevent you from falling into those holes over time that are so much harder to dig your way out of. Also, I think that it's a really good rule to have that if you're on call this week, you get Friday off. You get a 3-day weekend, right? In exchange for having a week where it can be stressful. Even if you aren't getting paid out of hours, it's a bit of a I think that people should while they're on call, they should take their laptop and take their phone, be able to tether. They shouldn't be tied to the house or tied to any one place. Have a reasonable SLA within 5 minutes, either respond or ping your secondary, always have a secondary. It shouldn't really encumber you too much, but it's still extra, right? And a 3-day weekend is just so nice. You can go and with the full support of your team. The biggest problem that we have at Honeycomb is we can't get people to take their Fridays off. It's really annoying. So you have to nag people not to work in production on their project stuff, and nag them to take their Fridays off. And I think that you'll find that people are pretty happy to be on call. The last thing I want to just note is, I'm of mixed mind about whether you should pay people for being on call. There's Gurgley, I forget his last name, has done a great roundup of all the different ways that companies address this. Do you pay? Do you not pay? Do you pay hourly? Do you pay for incident? All this stuff. And some cultures are one way and they should be that way. There's no one right answer, although if you say this on Twitter, everyone's going to scream at you that they're right. Anyway, I am mostly anti-paying people for being on call. I come from startup land. I'm a big fan of giving them the Friday off, as I said. And if somebody's had a rough night, the manager should take the pay. Nobody should have 2 rough nights in a row. Nobody should be on call when they have a baby. Those are bare minimums. But with one exception. If you are struggling to get your engineers the time that they need to do these fixes and the systems work, instead of just, cranking features and product stuff, then you should absolutely start paying people a lot of money every time they are alerted out of hours. Pay them a lot. Pay them so much that finance complains. Pay them so much that management starts begging you to work on reliability to save them money. That's all.